68% of the time, the first bidder wins. So don't be afraid of being first. But at the same time, it depends on your individual strategy for that property.
Greg, it's great to have you here. Today we're going to talk all about auction, and you are the auction guy. You're multi-winner of national awards in the auction space. You're now a general manager of Apollo Auctions across Australasia, from what I know. So it would for me, before we dive in, it probably will be great if you can share with us, why do you think people need to stick around and listen to this podcast to start with? Why it might be an interesting topic to learn a little bit more about auctions and how they run across different states.
The main reason, and thank you so much for having me. Really excited to have a chat. Obviously, we've known each other for a number of years now. For anyone that's just diving in and wanting to know what we're going to talk about, it's all the tips, all the tricks around auctions. There are so many misconceptions around auctions. Underquoting, reserve prices. What's the best thing to do on auction day? Should I dress up? Should I not dress up? It's unpacking all of that and just getting your listeners, your people, the best ability to be in the box seat when it comes to auctions. That's what we're here for.
That's awesome. Let's dive in. But just before that, maybe tell us a little bit about Apollo Auctions, like what this company is about and who is it actually created for? Like, who is your ideal client?
So we look at both just the Australian landscape of auctions, but also the New Zealand landscape of auctions as well. There's a broad diversification of how that looks across all the different states. In Victoria, I said we're a little bit backwards. There's still a lot of sales agents. So the people that are meeting you at the front door are also the ones that are calling the auctions on the weekend. In Queensland, in New South Wales, and in New Zealand, auctioneering is a specialist craft. That's what we are focusing on as Apollo Auctions. We call just over 7,000 auctions across Australia and New Zealand at this point in time, with some big goals to get that north of 10,000 auctions. But our main focus, funnily enough, is actually on training. We want to train agents to run better sales campaigns. We find auctions are the most transparent process in which to buy property, and you've experienced that buying on behalf of your clients. But it also allows for emotion to play its part, both in the seller's and the purchaser's journey. It allows that even platform for everyone to get the best.
Yeah, no, I can't agree more. And there's a lot of obviously fear on auctions, and people sometimes very hesitant because they can see the auction campaign is like, that will go crazy. But the reality is we all know how the pricing might be. The strategy around pricing can be adjusted based on the campaign that you run with the auction campaign, and sometimes very often it's actually the most transparent way to buy, as you've mentioned.
I saw recently there was a politician that said that auction sales should be outlawed to do with the cost of living crisis because it's making people pay too much money for properties. And I think that's a really short-sighted view because the person that's selling is also part of the being is also a consumer. The sellers are as much of a consumer as the buyers are. It's an emotional environment, but it allows for transparency. It allows for education. It's the easiest way for buyers to understand what a property is worth in today's marketplace.
100%. And the thing is that then there is no discussions behind the doors. You know exactly who you're competing. You can see your competition. So I don't say that I always try to buy the auction, but auction is definitely not something that I encourage my clients to disregard, and we actively participate in the auctions across the board, and across different states. This
Correct.
is where, I think the most interesting part is because we're all talking about borderless investments and we move to different states. We all know how there was a lot of movement post-COVID across the different states, and people were struggling because there is differences between the states, and there are differences in terms of how many vendor bids can be done, whether the reserve price should be disclosed. There's a lot of things that are slightly different between the states that can get you off guard, if you like. So it would be good to kind of start with that big picture. What are the differences between the different states? And maybe, as the first one, let's start with auction registrations.
Yes.
Because I think this is you mentioned already on that topic, and I
Yeah.
think it's a painful point.
Very much so. Very much so.
So maybe let's uncover that. Like, what are the differences between different states and what it results leads to?
Gotcha. So we'll look at the main eastern seaboard again. That's where a lot of the auctions are called within Australia is Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria. That is more than 80% of the auction volume across Australia. In Queensland, You must be registered to purchase a property at auction. So a pre-registration is required. That includes personal information regarding your license, all of those sort of things. Once you are registered, what you do at that auction is contractually binding. So if you bid to a certain level, that means that you are committing to purchase the property at that level. If you choose not to sign the paperwork, an auctioneer can do so on your behalf. In New South Wales, very, very similar. Must register to bid at auction. In Victoria, and my pain point is we are again very, very backwards. I tell a story that I love.
We are in Victoria, but
We are in Victoria, in lovely Northern East, an incredible home. But I like buying wine. I love wine. I'm not drinking at the moment, but I love wine. I buy wine online through Grays or any of those Langtons, any of those auction platforms. You must register to buy a bottle of wine. You must provide your license details. You must have a pre-authorization on your credit card to do so. But on Saturday, you can rock up to an auction with somebody's biggest asset, their biggest financial decision they're making in their life, put your hand up and have no recourse if you don't want to sign the paperwork. It's really backwards and it's very dangerous. So in Victoria, no registration required. You can turn up to an auction on Saturday, put your hand up and start bidding. In New Zealand, there is no registrations. They are moving more towards the registration platform, but there's no strict legal obligations at this point in time to be registered to bid. That's kind of the lay of the land across those four major auction sectors at the moment.
and then there's also a difference between the vendors' bids that are allowed in different states. There are different amount of vendors' bids that auctioneer can do. So you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so that also changes company on company. There's legislations that are in place, but most of the time you'll find it company by company, they have their own guidelines to work with. Victoria, we have unlimited vendor bids. I could keep bidding on behalf of my vendor as much as I want. I typically, as an auctioneer that calls a fair amount of auctions in Victoria, I typically only vendor bid twice. There might be the odd scenario where a third one's required, but it's very, very rare. In New South Wales, it's one vendor bid. In Queensland, there's different variations of what's seen, but it's usually one or two vendor bids in Queensland. So New Zealand, very, very similar. They've got obligations around their vendor bids too. But realistically, if you're a good auctioneer, and I know we're going to unpack the difference between a master and an apprentice in the auctioneering space, if you're a good auctioneer, you never need to vendor a bit more than twice. Go and have a conversation with that highest bidder. There's nothing stopping you with having a private conversation with a bidder from there.
Absolutely. And when do you find them be most useful? Like when do auctioneers tend to lean on them?
It's again in Victoria because we have unlimited vendor bids. People use them a little bit like candy. They'll just start to vendor bid for no particular reason because they're probably not very well skilled in their craft and they think that that's the best thing to do to keep an auction going. A lot of the time, it's actually hurting the vendors, not helping the vendors, because the vendor needs to understand what the market thinks their home is worth, not what the vendor thinks the home is worth. A lot of the time, it's to start an auction off in Victoria because buyers know that we have unlimited vendor bids. They almost wait for the auctioneer to start the auction with a vendor bid. In New South Wales, because there's only one, that is used sparingly. The auctioneer will typically wait 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes for an opening bid because they know they only have one opportunity to start that off. In Queensland, very similar as well. There's a lot of properties in Queensland that get passed in with no bids because they don't have pricing guidelines around pricing a property. They don't want to influence the market positively or negatively by placing a vendor bid. So the best place to use them, I always say, it's at a level that the vendor wouldn't sell a home at. It's not at the price that the vendor would sell a home at. It's at a price that you know you wouldn't sell a home at. The easiest way to explain the vendor bid, it's the vendor buying the home again for that price. So I ask any client that I'm working with, Mr. and Mrs. Vendor, you want $1 million. That's great. Would you buy the home again for $800,000? And they go, oh, maybe. And I say, well, that's where you place a vendor bid. Because if you buy it again, would you buy it again for 950? Oh, no, I wouldn't. Well, we're not placing a vendor bid there because that's what a vendor bid is. It's you buying a home again.
Yeah, absolutely. But very often, I find that it's used, as you said, to start the conversation.
Correct.
Or I guess when we're very close to the reserve, and when the auctioneer comes back, and they will just indicate where they should be. They're not too close to the like list. That's where I've seen it used the most in the field.
And again, that's probably a poor use of a vendor bid, in my opinion. Again, these are all opinion based. It's not fact. There's no guidelines or anything like that that's written about that. For me, if a buyer is holding the highest bid and you are close to your reserve price, go and have a conversation with the buyer to allow you to see if you can get that reserve price matched or beaten. You don't need to place another vendor bid, because at the end of the day, you're going to annoy that buyer.
I was just about to say, because very often this actually backfires, right? Because the higher bidder stands there and thinks, you just pissed me off.
Yeah.
So this is, I've seen it happening, but that's where probably it rolls into our next part of the conversation: master versus apprentice. What's the difference? Like, what is that key skill that the really good auctioneer need to develop to really assist the vendor during the process? And also for the buyer to understand, like in terms of what is the auctioneer trying to do and what are the real craft.
How long have we got? Because I could sit here and talk all day about
Let's
this.
go to the essence of it.
The essence of it is the difference between a master and apprentice is being able to read the room. Again, that can be external, that can be out on the street, but reading the situation and understanding the motivating factors of both parties and what information has been provided across that campaign. A lot of the time, auctioneers, if they're contract auctioneers, like our contract auctioneers for Queensland and for New South Wales, are coming in the last 3 days prior to auction and don't have the benefit of seeing what's happened over that entire campaign. So we have to process information quite quickly. Um, an apprentice auctioneer will only work based off what they think the right thing to do is, and they're using their opinion a lot of the time. They're going, I think it's worth this. I think it should be worth this. A master auctioneer is using facts, which is what has happened previously, what has been the feedback throughout that campaign, where are your vendors at, and using all of those numbers to come to a conclusion of what they think the home should be worth. Again, our opinion as the sales agent or the auctioneer is actually irrelevant. We are seen as an expert as far as clients always want us to tell what's my home worth. It's worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. What I tell you it's worth is completely irrelevant. What you think it's worth as a vendor is also somewhat irrelevant, which doesn't make sense to a lot of people. The main opinion of value is the buyer or buyer's opinion of value, because they're the ones that are actually going to give you cash for it. That's the main opinion. So difference between master and apprentice is actually understanding the situation and not limiting negotiations either too high or too low. Working and asking questions and understanding that situation is where the difference lies.
And when it comes to different states, there is different requirements as well in terms of who actually can lead the auction and be an auctioneer. So maybe we can touch a little bit on that.
Yeah, and we were just having a very quick chat before. Technically, in Victoria, Alexandra, you can call an auction.
Yeah.
Our receptionists at most agencies can call an auction. In Victoria, your only regulation to be able to call an auction is to have an agent's representative certificate. There is no higher level of certification to be able to call an auction in Victoria.
Enter. I'm a fully registered reader.
You're a fully licensed agent. I'm aware of that. But again,
Just saying.
somebody could have gone and done a 6-week course
I
online,
completely agree with you.
and it boggles my mind. In Queensland and in New South Wales, you must have a separate auctioneer's license, the same as in New Zealand as well. For us, in Victoria, the average amount of auctions per auctioneer would be less than 30. So each auctioneer in Victoria, on average, would call less than 30 auctions. In Queensland and in New South Wales, that average goes up to more than 200. So the variance in people's ability and the amount of times that they do that per year is just so drastic. I always have a joke that if I went to the gym once every 2 weeks, I'm not that in shape, but I would be a lot more out of shape than I am. Whereas if I was going to the gym every day for the year, you're probably going to be reasonably fit and reasonably healthy. Think about that in the auction space too. If you're calling an auction once every 2 weeks and you have to remember what to do and remember how to negotiate and remember how to act under pressure, you're not going to have any chance of actually being any good.
But let's say, I'm a vendor.
Yes.
And I'm selecting my team to sell my property.
Yep.
Because obviously you have a listing agent.
Yes.
And sometimes the listing agent is the auctioneer.
Yes.
Sometimes they prefer to contract someone to actually run the auction. What would you recommend the vendor to cross-check before they agree to appoint the auctioneer?
It's the age-old question. I have been both, just for context. I have been a listing and selling agent that has called auctions. I am and have been a contract auctioneer for 8 years now. There are vast differences in both. I find the ability for the auctioneer to be a completely standalone person opens up so many more avenues for discussions because as an auctioneer, it doesn't matter to me if the home sells or not on Saturday. That sounds like a very rude thing to say, but I will still get my remuneration by being booked for that auction, whether it sells or not. So I have no vested interest. My job is to provide the vendors with impartial advice and interpret the information given to me by the listing agent and the buyers on the day. As a listing agent, your best tool is to be there talking to the buyers during the auction so that you've met them for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks throughout the campaign. You understand why they're buying the home. You know it's because there's a school down the road that their kids go to. Their mum lives in the same street. They've always wanted that home. They've missed out on 5 last week. I don't know that as the auctioneer. You do. So be there talking to the buyers and having that discussion. As a vendor, how to pick, go and watch auctions. Go and watch how that auctioneer or that company interacts with the crowd. There is stark differences between good auctions and bad auctions. It's an intrinsic sort of feeling that I can't give you exactly, but you will see your best to try before you buy. Go and watch how they call an auction. Go and watch how that team runs and how they interact with bidders because bidders become buyers, buyers become sellers. You need to treat everybody on an even playing field. There's no ego, there's no chauvinistic showboating from an auctioneer that is needed. You are simply there to do a job, and that is to help both buyer and seller come together.
Yeah. But on this topic, then, when you're appointing the listing agent, like, to be honest, you need to see him working as a team, whoever, like with the person who is appointed to run the auction, if it's an auction campaign recommendation.
Correct.
Because the reality is you can't force a listing agent to work with your preferred auctioneer. We both know it doesn't go well if there's
We're
no
starting to do
teamwork.
some of it. I'm starting to have some pull with some vendors, but
But it's the teamwork that will get distorted in the process, and a lot to do with this, like as you said, during the auction, if the auctioneer is separate to the listing agent, very often you will observe that once there is a pause, when the auctioneer just disappeared behind the doors to talk to the vendor, that's when the listing agent rushes to the top bidders, trying to understand their situation, whether there's anything left
yeah.
in their pocket to just kind of bridge that gap between the vendor's expectations and where the seller is at the moment.
Yeah, and just to get information. Information allows us to make decisions. That is that is the biggest thing that I work on is I'm here to provide you as much information about why I'm doing what I'm doing because I've done this 2,000, 2,500 times. I understand the little emotional cues, people's body language, all of those sort of things. That's what I'm reading as the auctioneer. And sometimes I just need to pause it very briefly to have a quick chat with the agent to give them that information because I'm seeing something different. As an auctioneer, I'm watching the crowd. I'm watching everyone in the crowd. As a listing agent, you're typically watching the highest bidder that you're standing next to and me. You're not seeing everything else that I'm seeing. So it's the ability to interpret that information as a vendor to pick who you're working with, you really need to make sure that they have a good synergy between the listing agent and auctioneer. If the listing agent is the auctioneer, you need to make sure that they have a team that is well oiled, be it assistants, be it co-agents, be it whoever it is that can work that crowd. Or if the listing agent is a listing agent and they employ an auctioneer, you need to make sure that they have good synergy. There's a client, an agent that I work with very regularly. I've been calling auctions for him since 2017. He knows what I'm going to say before I say it. I know what he's going to say before he says it. And we're both very inappropriate, so it doesn't work very well all the time. But it's the ability to know each other's MO and what you're doing and why you're doing it and have that full trust with each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's wonderful. And just to kind of summarize the topic around the different states, just as a whole, there is also difference between we you showed me awesome stats, and we will share it in the notes around the differences about how many properties are sold before the auction and how many properties are sold actually on the auction day or post auction, because it's a very interesting stats, right? And I think again it depends a lot on the different state.
Correct.
There's rules around the cooling off.
Yep.
And because systems predict the behavior, And that's where it's slightly different for each state. So maybe we can touch base on that.
Spot on that. I'm going to have to refer to the phone because there's a fair bit of information in here. But we were just having a chat before, and it's mind-boggling to see the difference between different states. Nationally, I, as an auctioneer and as an auction leader in the landscape across Australia and New Zealand, we as a company look at 5 avenues for how an auction ends. So an auction campaign: selling at auction, selling prior to auction, selling after auction, and that's typically within a 3-day period is the cutoff for selling after auction, whether a property was withdrawn or it was passed in and then converted to private sale. Nationally, the average is 35.1% of homes sell at auction on the day. So when people talk clearance rates at 55, 60, 65, 70%, it's actually a false number. There are 35% of homes that sell at auction. Sold prior, so selling prior to auction is 20%. Selling after auction is 2.5%. Withdrawing from the marketplace is 18.8%. It just doesn't make sense to me. Why would you go down this auction pathway and then not find out what the market thinks your home's worth? And then past it is 23%. In Victoria, 43% of homes sell at auction. In New South Wales, 28%. In Queensland, 27%. So in Victoria, we are ways away above the other two states. But in the reverse, in Victoria, 18% sell prior to auction. In New South Wales, that's 26%. So 1 in 4 homes will sell prior to auction. But in Queensland, it's 10%. That's the biggest variance across all of the states, is selling prior to auction, because it depends on, as you said, cooling off periods. In Victoria, we have no ability as a consumer to waive our rights to cool off. In Victoria, it's a 3-day period, which you know very, very well. And most agents will push buyers to make an offer in the Wednesday prior to a Saturday auction. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is in your no cooling off period. If you make an offer on a Tuesday, that buyer has until 11:59 p.m. on Friday night to change their mind. In New South Wales, you can waive your rights to cool them off. Section 66W, if you want to get really technical, of the Sales Act allows a buyer to waive their rights to cool off. In Queensland, there's different scenarios in which cooling off rights do and don't apply to publicly advertised auctions. So we can clearly see that in New South Wales, 26% of homes are sold prior to auction because they can waive their rights to cooling off. In Victoria, most sellers will just take the risk and go to auction.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Interestingly enough, you look at withdrawal properties in New South Wales, 27% of homes are withdrawn prior to auction. And it goes back to how pricing is worked out across these 3 states. In Victoria, we have to have a price advertised for a property. Called Statement of Information, Section 47A of the Estate Agents Act says that we must provide free comparable properties within 2 kilometres that have allowed us to provide this price. In New South Wales, you're allowed to advertise with a guide. What that guide means, nobody knows. In Queensland, you are not allowed to advertise a price for a property.
You know, well, provide
Or
that
auction.
guidance. Yeah.
And so I can understand why buyers are confused. I'm confused, and I do this every day. I'm a specialist in it. This is my job. But I can understand why buyers are just so confused with how the marketplace works.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I remember, especially when we were looking post-COVID, when Queensland was booming and moving, at the week space. Basically, next week you will be buying it for 10K, 20K more. So as a result, you have to really be good with your knowledge on the ground because, I think 80% of my investment properties that year I bought actually in Queensland.
Yep.
And because there's no guidance, no price ranges, nothing, you have to be really, really good with what that property just sold for, what that property sold for. You just have to be 24/7 knowing every single sale and track it to be able to narrow down what's the fair price. But, it's an interesting space.
It is, and I look at it from 2 perspectives too, which is seller and buyer. Sellers are always looking in the rear view mirror when they're looking at price. So they're always looking at, well, what has sold previously? What am I comparing to? And at the end of the day, comparisons are the thief of joy. Is if you're constantly comparing to another property, the buyer that's purchased that property is clearly no longer interested in yours unless they're a developer and they're buying multiple homes. But that has no bearing on your home. The other buyers that have missed out on that property may not like yours. So again, that's not too relevant to you. But as a buyer, they're always looking, out the windscreen. They're looking forward. They're looking at, well, what else is available, what else is coming up, what is this home priced at, and who else have I got to beat? And so both seller and buyer are looking at different lenses of what a home could be worth. At the end of the day, a home is only worth what somebody is willing to pay for it. Our job as auctioneers and through this auction process is, in an ideal world, we create competition and emotional competition that will increase the chances of a home selling well and for a good price. But at the same time, it's also providing that transparent atmosphere that if buyers don't see value at the price that's currently advertised in Victoria, well, the vendor gets educated by that. They actually understand that the market is only worth X, Y, or Z. The trickiest situations that we find ourselves in is when you have one buyer,
Yes.
because then there is no ability for people to have any idea on justification of price because you've only got one person's opinion. When I'm working with sellers and we're having that discussion, if you've got one, two, three, four opinions of real buyers in the marketplace that they think your home is worth X, it's very hard for me to tell you that what you think it's worth is correct as the seller, unless that's less than what the other four buyers want. If you're $100,000 more than what the four buyers think it's worth, I'm sorry, but I have no grounds to tell you that that's correct. The market has told you it's worth this. If you think it's worth more, that's great. But you should probably hold off to sell until the market catches up.
Like for me, from the buyer's agent perspective, to be honest, I'm looking at both.
Yep.
I would say actually look at the rear mirror very, very carefully when we analyze the data, just to know exactly what happened what happened in that area, even in that pocket, in that street,
Yep.
with that type of property, or something similar that sold recently. But also you need to understand, how often that type of property comes to the market,
Spot.
what's happening on the market right now, and also, is it an investor, is it an owner occupier, how many ticks it ticks on the list of preferences for your client. So there is obviously the strategy that you develop for each property, but I love the rear mirror though.
But you're a specialist in the field. You're a market leader in what you do, and your ability to ascertain prices based off a number of factors. When people are selling, they only care about themselves. And it's fair, they're allowed to. It's their biggest asset. It's what they've worked their life for. They're spending 30 to 40% of their salary on paying this bloody thing off. They only care about themselves. As a buyer, you're in the same pool. But you've got to think, if you're a buyer in the marketplace, there's probably 3 or 4 or 5 other people doing the same thing.
Of course.
If you're a seller in the marketplace, same thing. And they're not thinking about you and you're not thinking about them. You only care about yourself. When you get that wider view, which is where you get employed and I get employed, is to actually understand the full scope of the market.
100%. And like just if we go back to the auctions and tactics that you've mentioned that the auctioneer does during the auction, and what he has to implement about like reading the crowd, controlling increments, I think that's an interesting part to touch on, because there is different strategies or different behavior that I think is important for our listeners to understand before the reserve is reached and after the reserve is reached. If we reach the reserve,
Yep.
after the reserve, you can go, if you like, as low as you like, as long as you're going.
$50 on it.
Yeah, it's just, like you have that flexibility. But if the auctioneer hasn't reached the reserve, they actually have the right to reject the bid or like kind of to impose that increments. And if we will go back to the discussion around what the auctioneer's role is and what's the art around, super master, when he's running or she's running the auction, because I see more females coming to the site, which is super exciting. I want to understand, like what are the tactics that are commonly used? Because we both know that increments are controlled quite vigorously by the auctioneer outside of only the crowd reading, etc. I think increments is an important part of it, because this is how you want to try to reach the reserve, and we both can tell that until the reserve is reached, auctioneer is really vigorously trying to control it.
Yep.
Maybe if you can bring the example of that, versus once the reserve reached, that's where you have a little bit more flexibility and get away with some arrogant bits, I guess.
Yeah, spot on. And again, I guess I'll ask you as a leader in the field, is you've got a strategy that you would work towards for your buyers as to how you've bid. I know that I've got a strategy in which I like to happen for buyers, but I've also got one that I don't like to happen. So I'll touch on that on the sec. But as you as a market leader, what do you like to do for your clients when you're bidding?
All right, of course, it depends on the property. It depends on how much interest that property gets.
Yep.
We both know if that the let's say if you want to, and if you go back to strategy as a buyer,
Yep.
one of the best strategies is to actually know the value of the property and what's your maximum walk away price.
Yep.
What's your dream price? What's your fair price? And what's your walk away price? Because once you've done
Speaking my language now. You're speaking my language.
when you come to the auction, I don't have a hesitation. I know exactly where my prices are, and we discuss this price with the day before, normally with my client.
Yep.
And it's set the day before.
Yep.
So I tell them I won't call you on the day
Yep.
because I don't want you to stretch or get emotional about it.
Right.
So we've already done the homework. This is what we know is comfortable for you. This is the walkaway price. That's all I need to know. And maybe there is a price that it passes in. You know, that I say I don't go more than that without calling you if it passes in. But if it's not, this is the maximal walkaway price. So when all the work is pretty much done before the auction, at the auction it's more of the execution or performance, if you like, and there are definitely various strategies. But if we come back to your question, if I know that there is a lot of interest, I would assume you would want me to go slow. As from my perspective, I would try to knock out quite a few from the very start.
Yep.
Because if I know that the property is advertised, and we're looking at one right now, I think by the time this will be released, it will be sold.
Yep.
But it's advertised at 900 to 990.
Cool. And that's, I was going to say, let's work on a price range to
Yeah.
I'll give our
I can tell you, the listing 900 to 990.
Yep.
Just for your reference, 103 parties went for the property.
So that's going to sell for 1.15, 1.2.
No, yes, probably 1.2, comfortable. Like it's a dream price, 1.2. Let's put it this way.
Yep.
So I know that this property is worth 1.2 any time of the day.
Yep. Where's it located?
It's located. Just because I'm mindful when I will release it. So I don't want to just, shoot at someone, the podcast, but, it's clearly underquoted. Like there are some references that they have for it, but based on the interest, obviously, the market dictates the rules. And it's clearly will achieve 1.1 any time of the day, 1.2 dream price for my client.
Yep.
I think we're ready to go to 1.3 on that property. So when I will go there, and I still will be doing all my research, looking at all the properties that just sold that week, what's happening, what's with interest like, what sold last weekend. But when we'll go there, I know that my first bid will not be around 1 million. Like I think my first bid will be probably 1.1. Just to make sure that everyone who hasn't done their homework doesn't even bother or doesn't try to stretch themselves.
Yep.
And then from there, it probably will be very fast and very sharp.
Yeah. And I have a saying with all the clients that I'm working with, I bid for a lot of clients on their behalf at auctions. When I'm not calling the auctions, I love bidding at other people's auctions because I know the tactics that as an auctioneer, I would hate to see. And so it's playing against that. We have really good conversations. You've bid at a number of my auctions before. We had conversations about selling. And it's also that good dialogue, just to understand. I will go up to buyers agents, buyers advocates before auctions and just say, what's the plan today? And there's a professional courtesy there. A lot of the time they will say, we're going to go strong. We're going to start low. We're going to see what happens. I don't think my client's got enough to buy it. It's having that professional courtesy to have that conversation too, which really helps.
But what would be your ideal scenario so that you get the best outcome in this particular case?
Yeah, gotcha. So 99, let's work with that price range. I have a fundamental view that if you're bidding for a client or if you are the client, you want to rip the Band-Aid off quickly. You as a buyer ideally start at just below the level at which you're comfortable spending, not your absolute max, but not where you dream to get at that. So 99.90, I'll give you an example. Say you had a budget of 1.1. You saw a home at 99.90. I would start the bidding at $1,020,000, $1,030,000, something like that. Maybe even $1,050,000 if you knew you were going to spend up to 1.1 on the home. Because the worst thing that happens is you're the first bidder and the only bidder. And if you would have been comfortable paying that price anyway, pay it without competition. Knock all the other competition out. As an auctioneer, I want the exact opposite. If it's quoted 99.90, you've got 1.5. Understand? Start me at 800. Let's go. Let's have some fun. Because the first 3 bids of any bidder are so nervous for them. The first bid is shitting themselves. They're sitting there shaking. They're going, who else have I got to go? I've seen you at another open. I've seen you at an auction. Be very nervous. Second bid, you're like, okay, I'm getting into this. Third bid, you're like, come on, let's go. Like, we're going to have some fun. So I want momentum in an auction. I want 800, 820, 840, 860, 880, 900, 920, 940, 960, 980, get to a million. And then we talk about increments. The increments will start to get smaller and the time between bids will start to get longer. That's when I know that people are starting to hit the threshold at which they're questioning the value of the home. Then we need to push into the boundaries of whether they're getting towards the top end of their budgets. So budgets and perception are two different things. Budgets are usually hard caps. They usually come in lovely bold letters from your bank saying you are pre-approved up to X. The only time a buyer thinks about their budget is when they're under pressure and when they're put under competition. You're never going to offer on a property up to a max budget without some form of competition, which is the auction environment. That's why it's an emotional price that's there. So really, I want, in an ideal world, auctions to start low. I was just telling you about an auction I had on the weekend. It was quoted $1.8 to $1.9 million. Lovely block of land. Well, technically, there was a house on it, but the house wasn't worth much. Quoted 1.8 to 1.9. We're in Victoria, so we have to quote price. I asked for an opening bid at 1.7. Got nothing. The crowd's stunned, shocked, going, what's going on? I put a vendor bid at 1.7. Took me 2.5 minutes to get the first bid from a buyer. 1.75 million. It then went from 1.75 to $2,150,000 in about 5 minutes of just consistent back and forth bidding in 50s, 25s. At 2.15 started to slow down. We went into $1,000 and one bidder was still in $10,000 lots. It ended up selling for $2.2 million. $500,000 worth of bidding. So don't be scared of where it starts. Just know your buyer cues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But if we go back to that case scenario, like 900 or 990,
Yep.
so in ideal world, the auctioneer probably will want the buyers to warm up very slowly.
Yep.
Just to make sure, you said the first three bids are always a bit tough, a bit harder.
Yep.
But once the bidder warms up, you kind of expect them to go a little bit.
Be more free with their bidding. Simple maths that I use, and I use this with all of the clients that we work with, our auction partners. I ask them how many bidders they think they have. Again, in Victoria, we don't have to register. How many bidders do you think you have? Where's the reserve price going to be set? And what do you think it's worth? So sometimes reserve prices and what the agent thinks it's worth can be very different. Sometimes they're higher, sometimes they're lower. I look at it as if you have 4 bidders, you want them to bid 3 times each. That's 12 bids. The average bid is $10,000. 12 times 10,000 is $120,000. Work from your reserve backwards by that amount. Bidders times 3. That's where you want to start the bidding. Had a property on the weekend, another one, 750 to 825 was the quote range. Reserve price was 820. I got to start at 700. We had 4 bidders. 4 bidders, 3 bids, $120,000, 700 to 820. You're on the market. That's my rough calculation.
All right. And then we go to the tactics like, okay, increments control, as you said, and we've discussed that the increments control are very often happening particularly vigorously until the reserve is reached.
Yep.
And from there, the auctioneer can be a bit more forgiving with your cheeky lower bids, if you like.
Yep.
Then there is also, I found another strategy that auctioneer very often use, like personalizing. When they address the people in the audience, like a gentleman in the beautiful hat, do you still have more?
Positively.
Positivity, some jokes, and those pauses when, the reserve, let's say, because, like the most ambiguity that people very often have around auctions is like when the reserve will be announced. Yep. And I think we haven't touched that because as we've discussed, touch base on that, because as far as we know that the best practice seems to, announce the reserve price or is on the market, but based on our conversations, you don't need to.
I reckon we could do a whole nother podcast on reserve prices. We could sit here and chat for an hour on reserve prices. There is a common misconception in Victoria and in anywhere that is calling auctions that a reserve price must be at the top end of the range, within 10% of the range. I've heard so many different wild theories. It has to be at the bottom end of the range. It must be in the middle of the range. It's got to be at the top end. It's got to be within 10% of the top end. The vendor will set it from day one and tell the agent's just lying. It's all rubbish. A reserve price in a best case scenario is set at the time that you're just about to walk out to do the auction. That reserve price should be written down and it should be on the agency agreement. That is an agreement between the seller the auctioneer, and potentially the agent, but really it should only technically be between the seller and the auctioneer, that is the bottom threshold at which the auctioneer is authorized to call the home on the market. Not that they must call the home on the market. And that is a very, very common misconception. Again, you're an expert in your field. You know that you can ask that question of an auctioneer, are we on the market? And have we reached reserve? The auctioneer is the sole gatekeeper for a reserve price. I have no legal obligation as the auctioneer to call a home on the market at or above reserve price. But once I've said it's on the market, I can't retract those words. I can't go, no backsies, sorry.
But let's say you reach the reserve.
Yep.
That is written on the piece of paper and somebody asks you during the auction.
Yep.
Have we reached the reserve?
Yep.
Do you have a legal obligation to say yes if we did?
No legal obligation. Best practice guide would say that is in the best interest of all parties, sellers and buyers. Best practice guide is that. Legal obligation, no. There is no legal obligation. This has been challenged. I'm part of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria's auction chapter. There are 6 of us in the whole of Victoria that represent that. We have challenged this both legally and sort of morally. Morally, you should. Legally, up to the auctioneer to call the home on the market.
All right. So that clears at least the waters around that.
And the reason for that, just to unpack that and explain it a little bit more, there may have been pre-auction indications from buyers in excess of the reserve price because the agent has done their job and got the vendors to understand that competition is what's going to create price. If, say, for instance, they've set a reserve price, let's use the 9 to 990 example, they set a reserve price at 990. I'm going to
She's within a range, surprisingly enough.
top end of the range, unlike most auctions at the moment, but 9 to 990, they set a reserve price at 990. The agent has had conversations with buyers throughout that campaign, not offers, just conversations. And some of that feedback has been, at about $1 million, I'd be comfortable. The agent gets the reserve price set at 990 because it's within the parameters of what's best practice again. And having those conversations with the vendors, they're like, well, we're not happy, but we're okay to set it at 990. It gets to 990 during the auction or 995 and the auction stops. The auctioneer, master the apprentice, the master auctioneer, understands that there's probably more left in the crowd. It's the ability to work with that and see how you can get the best outcome for your clients. The apprentice auctioneer goes, well, I'm above reserve now. I'm just going to call it on the market. And there might be one more bid and it sells. The master auctioneer will pause the auction, walk up to the highest bidder and say, 995, we're just in a position where the vendors are actually seeking a little bit more than this. Is there a number that you could test them with to see if we can get the home on the market? You're allowed to do that. Lots of people don't because they don't have the experience. They don't have the understanding. They don't have the balls or the lady balls to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's say when you pause the auction, when is the pause oftenly used? And what's happening behind the scenes when the auctioneer actually doesn't go to the highest bidder, but goes back into the room to speak to the vendor? What it's all about? Maybe it will be good for you to
Good question.
reveal
Reveal all the secrets and tricks. What's actually happening? Sometimes it's just bloody hot and I'm getting a drink of water because it's too hot and I need a break. Realistically, in the best case scenario, I've had a discussion with the vendors, not just on the day of auction, but prior. Phone call, Zoom, face-to-face, whatever it is, to explain to them the 3 scenarios on which auctions work. Red light, yellow light, green light. Very simple. On a simple guide, there are simple scenarios. Red light, no bids, no bidders, no action, we're passing in. Green light scenario, good bids, good bidders, above reserve price, we're selling. Yellow light scenario, which is where we're touch and go on their reserve price or their okay price or their happy price. We're in that realm and we've got to make split-second decisions. For me, I'm walking inside to more give that information about why I'm doing what I'm about to do. It's not so much asking permission a lot of the time. It's giving them information so that they're comfortable with the moves that we're about to make. It's all about the preparation. If you're making split-second decisions on the day and putting people under pressure, you are not being the best person. You are not being the best version of yourself or giving them the best opportunity to get a great result. My job is to give them context as to why we're doing what we're doing. And that may be a live negotiation above their reserve price. I've had vendors tell me, get that back out there and put it on the market. And I've said, no, just wait, just let me do my job. That's what you've employed me for as an expert. And we've gone and got them 50, 60, 70, $100,000 more than their reserve price by reading a room and reading that scenario. You, when you're bidding for clients, you will have, I'm sure, had clients tell you before, this is the one, this is my dream home, this is what I want. And you're like, hold up, hold up, hold up, hold up. Don't get emotional about it. Let's not overpay. My job is to understand if they've said that to themselves or said that to you, or how do I get them to pay as much as possible? At the end of the day, and it sounds bad, I work for the vendor. I don't work for the buyer. Of course, bidders become buyers, buyers become sellers. And so there's three sides to the transaction. Me as the agent and the auctioneer, the seller and the buyer. When everyone's happy, I'm happy. I don't want to see an auction where the buyer is crying because they've paid too much. And I don't want to see an auction where the seller's crying because they had to sell. The happiest ones are when everyone's happy.
Absolutely. And, all right. And that might, let's just touch very briefly on when would you refuse the bid?
Yep.
And then go to, so what can the buyers do to be successful in the auction?
Yeah, so refusing the bid, couple of scenarios. One is when we're just far too far away from reserve price. Typically, though, I will take bids even at lower increment levels, or at least I'll push back first of all. Had a gentleman on the weekend. We were bidding in $10,000 lots very, very early on in the bidding, and it was a nice flow. And he tried to give me $1,000. I said, so not at this stage. I'm comfortable. I may come back to you. Not at this stage. Another buyer jumped in with $10,000 and kept that pattern going. And it's the ability to defend the vendor's position, but in a kind way. You'll see some auctioneers, and I'm sure you've been in enough auctions, no, not taking thousands, no, not doing it. And it turns that buyer off. Why would they come back and try and engage with you and say, so just know at this stage, we're just not in the position to take $1,000 just yet. I had a joke sometimes. It was hot on Saturday. And I said, so I haven't put my sunscreen on today. I can't take $1,000 at this stage because I'm going to get burned. That's a fun interaction. By saying, no, not doing it, no, not doing it, why would they come back and bid? That's typically below reserve price, just trying to defend that vendor's position and value of property. The other part is when you're above reserve, or you can see that one buyer has a specific strategy. They're bidding $1,000 very quickly after each bid. It's 10,000 over here, 1,000. 10,000 over here, 1,000. 10,000 over here, 1,000. Sometimes I'll just go, oh, we'll bugger it. Let's work with that person's strategy. But build your own strategy around their strategy. We were discussing just before is you're in $10,000 lots. It's 550 and 560 and 570. And then this buyer goes 575. You were 570 here. You wanted 580, but they said 575. You take the 575, but then this bit over here would have been 590 if you were continuing the patterns. So a good auctioneer, master v apprentice, wouldn't go 575, give me 580. The master would go 575, 590. Do we go back at 590? And if this bidder is just puttying your hams doing what you're saying, they'll just say yes. Make it easy for people to say yes. That's my job.
Absolutely. But that strategy with 1,000 can be quite effective.
Can they?
Just sharing, like in terms of
Very much so.
It can be very effective, especially if you're above the reserve and you don't want to pay too much. And wonder whether you overpaid and there was some room of the weevil, because you can just put that one extra K on top of whatever comes your way. And
$100 as well. It's demoralizing for the other bidder that you're bidding against. So instant and quick bids, straight back, show no hesitation, show strength, even if they're in $1,000 lots. And again, you'll be at 10 to bid, at 10 to bid, at 10. I have now $1,010,000. Where do we go from here to $1,010,000? And that person takes ages to bid the next 10,000. And as soon as they bid 10,000 to 1,000, that person's like, this person's not going to go away. It's going to be a long day. They just want to buy it, and they'll give up earlier sometimes. Whereas if you're letting that momentum play out and it's 5,000 and 5,000 and 5,000 and 5,000, it just keeps going and it feels like a heavy, an even balance.
you just basically act like you have no end to it. You have plenty of budget to work with. And that's where, when we're talking about the buyers, very often, like I wouldn't say that there is a different slightly strategies whether you go first or pause. And again, it depends a lot on how popular the property and, how many bidders potentially you have there. And it doesn't stop you to go and ask how many bidders you reckon you have in the crowd.
And the agents will always lie to you. I guarantee you, every time you ask an agent, they'll say, oh, 2, maybe 3. Every time, because 2, maybe 3 means that there's some competition. And so you get social proof that somebody else wants to buy it. But at the same time, it's not scaring you off. Because if I said, oh, I've got 6 bidders, you're going to be, oh, shit.
Very often you can actually ask additional questions that will go back to how to maybe uncover a little bit more insights around the auction. How many parties went through the property? Has anyone done building and pest inspection? How many Section 32s have been requested? Are you all sending them out automatically, or people actually requested that? Any adjustments that being requested to the contract by the other bidders? So there's different questions you can ask to actually understand, how much interest potential that property has, and outside of just how many bidders you potentially have.
68% of the time, the first bidder wins. So don't be afraid of being first. But at the same time, it depends on your individual strategy for that property. You can always ask the agent whether the vendor has purchased or why they're selling. As agents, good agents will have a standard line, which is the vendors no longer have a need for the home. That's pretty ambiguous. You can tell simple things: check the wardrobes, check the fridge. You can tell if they're living there or not. If they're not living there, the likelihood that they're probably going to be wanting to sell on the Saturday increases drastically. If it's an investment property, same thing. If nobody's living in the home, their desire to sell on the day is much higher. If they're still living in the home, sometimes they may not have purchased, etc. And so you've got different places to work in.
You're 100%.
The best tip I can give you is work with the agent and work with the auctioneer. At the end of the day, I shouldn't have favorites, and you shouldn't have favorites for clients, but you just know that you do. It's intrinsic. I have bidders that will come up to me at the start of an auction, and I'll have a laugh with them and just go, hey, I'm just here to help today. I'm just here to add up the numbers. Let's have some fun. If I have somebody that's really cold and stony face and just goes, yeah, we'll see how it goes, I'm like, okay, well, maybe good luck. Like, let's go. I get my back up and I'm like, come on, let's fight. But if I've got a really nice couple or a nice family, nice kids, and having high fives, I'm like, good luck, kids, having high fives and having a bit of fun. I'm like, I actually want you to win. Like, not that I'm going to treat you any differently, but work as a team. The buyer's there to buy, the seller's there to sell, and the agent's there to get paid.
Yeah,
Really.
100%.
And so work as a team.
I'm a big believer in a win-win outcomes, regardless, and I think it's a very important thing to mention.
Yep.
That we're all humans, and the thing is that it's really good to understand what's driving the vendor. It's really good to understand what's driving the agent as well, because let's say there was a little bit of an overpromise to start with. You need to understand, are you competing with the agent, or are you competing with the agent's ego or overpromise or whatever that is. It also has a place to be, because then you're just better informed. But you definitely want to be on the good side with the agent, understand the situation. But when you bid, be super confident. Poker face is okay. But at the same time, I'm a big believer as well. Personally, when I bid, I'm always confident at the auction, but it's a lot because I've done the homework before. That's probably the most critical part. Do your homework. Like I'm talking, make sure that your finances are done, right? Because we all know the repercussions if you're not settling. That's probably the most dramatic end of the story. But at the same time, I don't like to challenge other bidders, in an arrogant way.
Never.
I prefer just not even look their way, and that can be something that you guys might like. It's good to know where they stand. It's good to know where they are, but without challenging them with your body language, with the way you just focus on the auctioneer. You focus on the process. Keep your mind on the numbers. Know where you're going with it. Just be aware of your surroundings, but don't try to play cowboy there.
The other hot tip I can give to buyers is if you're looking in a specific area, most buyers will narrow it down to 2, 3, 4 suburbs, unless you're an investor that's purchasing in different areas. And again, I know that you'll have lots of people that are in that scenario. If you are an owner-occupier purchaser that is looking to purchase in a specific area, go and look at the bigger agencies and agents in that area. And if you've nailed down a home, you've seen it week one and you're like, this is the one, this is what I want, and I know I've got the budget to buy it, work out that agent and go and look at some of their other auctions, because you'll be able to read what that auctioneer or that agent does and see their body language when they're on the market compared to when they're not on the market. Go and understand how they price their homes so that you're not missing out. At 9 to 9, I probably have a pretty good idea of where the property is and who it is based on a couple of different agencies. We know in specific areas which agencies underquote or quote on the lower side, which agencies promise the world to their vendors and deliver them a marble. So they'll be $200,000 over, and by auction day, it's come down and come down and come down. And then you've got the best agents that are just there or thereabouts. The best auctions that we see sell within $50,000 at the top end of the range, but below the top end of the range or above the top end of the range in Victoria, because that means it's worked. That means that the agent was true and fair. They've read their marketplace. They're an expert. The buyers have seen value at the range that's been advertised, and the sellers have been on board with the advertising campaign to create competition. Lots of agents wear it as a badge of honor that they sold $2, $3, $4, $500,000 over reserve price. I have a bit of an issue with that sometimes, because at the end of the day, yes, the vendors have made money and the agent works with vendors, and so do I. But also those those bidders become buyers become sellers. At the end of the day, they've got to recoup that money at some point in time in their life. If they want to hold it for 10, 15 years, they'll do it. But if they're going to sell within the next 3 to 5 years, and we've seen that happen over COVID times, we've had peaks and troughs in markets. And that's the really difficult part at the moment. A lot of people that I'm auctioning for, one of the 3 deeds, there's been a death, there's been a deceased estate, and we're dealing with 3 or 4 or 5 kids that have inherited this property and they don't know what it's worth. And you always have one that thinks it's worth more than the rest. Debt, people are in debt and they have to sell because of interest rates, life circumstances, cost of living, Trump's tariffs, whatever you want to call it, and divorce. Don't underestimate. An agent's job is quite difficult. I've been an agent. I know how difficult it is. They're emotional counselors sometimes.
Yeah, no, I can't agree more. And we all know that people sell properties very often because they need to. It's good if it's the need from the good cause, because they're upgrading to a better home and moving interstate or anything like that. But we also know there is a lot of a lot of sellers at the moment that are selling due to life circumstances and also selling due to interest rates increases and so forth. But that's why it's very important, guys, that do your homework. Make sure your finances are sorted, because that can be very dramatic if you purchase at the auction and you can't settle. You can lose your deposit and actually then pay the penalty fees. And we're talking about, let's say if it's $1 million property, and they lose 100K of the deposit, and then potentially that property sold for 950, the seller actually can go after you for another $50,000, which is very dramatic. But all the homework needs to be done with auctioneers. I said, like, nothing hurts you to stop. Like, what are the terms of the auction? They should be discussed in advance. What are the circumstances of the vendor, so you understand where they stand. I think like today's episode was like full of great insights, and as I said, you're the auction guy, so you are the person that knows this space inside out, and I'm very grateful for you to coming in today and to sharing all those insights with us. Please keep doing what you're doing, and we'll keep us updated about all the insights. And it was great to have you on. But before I let you go, as one of the things at this episode, I love to know what is the book for like every person that comes and visit me at the property for breakfast. I would like to know, is there any book that you would recommend to anyone to read if they want to be better at property investment, at wealth creation, or understanding property, or even be better decision making, as simple as that you think that shape maybe the way you also see?
So I'm going to be a bit of a cop out here. I'll still give a couple of good books, but I'm not the biggest reader. Being in the job that I do, my attention span is very short. You can ask my wife and my daughter about that too. I have severe ADHD, so I'm always doing different things. I get snippets of TikToks and 45, 60-second stuff. That's what I'm into. The good old ones, Barefoot Investor, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, they're really good ones that a lot of people work on. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck is one of my favorites that I have read. Shoe Dog, but that's not about property, it's just the biggest one at the moment that I've read that I love is actually from a very, very, very good friend of mine, Andy Reid's Success Curious. That's more so about being successful generally in life. And there was a comment that I made before about comparison is the thief of joy. Is run your own race, be your own person, understand what you're doing and what suits your needs in your life. The Success Curious really ties into that, and just about being curious about what success looks like for you.
That's awesome. I think curiosity is the power of all that keeps us going.
Correct.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Greg. Great to have you.
Thank you.